All right, so in the last video, we created our custom UITableview cell called card cell, and we learned a tiny bit about optionals where it took kind of a twist. And then we also learned how to basically set our data inside of it within the cell after setting it from the UITableview controller, right? So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to actually get to the layout part. That's what I wanted to do in the last video, but it kind of went on a little bit longer than I wanted to. And what we're going to do is start by creating the image view, okay? Because you can see in the completed app, we have the image view. I think you're pretty well aware of what this all does by now. I've kind of flipped back over here multiple times. But we need to get that image view in, the title label, and then the text view. And I wanted to put that into one video. So let's go ahead and start typing them out. Let's say var, and then, well, what we'll do is we'll say file private because we want it to be file private. File private var feature image. And we're going to make this of type UI image view is equal to a function that's basically going to call itself. This will allow us to kind of put all the properties in our image view before we even have it declared, basically. So what we're going to say is we're going to say let iv is equal to UI image view. And the next thing I want you to do is say iv.translates auto resizing mask into constraints is equal to false. Okay. Now, basically what this is going to allow us to do is basically use auto layout programmatically with NSLayoutConstraint. If you do apply this property, frames aren't going to work. You're going to have to use auto layout, okay? And that's what we want. And then just return it, and then let's apply some more properties. Let's say iv.content mode is equal to .scale aspect fill, and I'll come back to this and remove it and show you kind of what this does once we get everything on the screen, but I want to type it all out right now, okay? And then we're going to say iv.layer.masks to bounds is true, and iv.layer.corner radius is equal to 2. Now this is simply, those last two lines, the layer ones, it's simply to give us this kind of very subtle corner on our image, right? You can barely see it, but it's there and it's pretty noticeable at the same time, but it's not. I don't know how to explain that, but you get the point. All right, so we're good there. Now, what I want to do is I want to get rid of this background color yellow because we don't really need that right now or ever. And what I want to do is flip over to the app and make sure we don't have a background color like that. All right, so it looks good to me. Let's go ahead and, okay, so it's just white, right? So let's set it to white, even though I think that's what it is by default. Let's say .white. And then let's go ahead and type out the rest of our views right here, all right? All right, so let's say file private, title label is of type UI label, and it's a function that's going to call itself. Let's say let label is equal to UI label, and then we'll say label.font is equal to UI font.system font. Okay, what's going on here? I didn't call it a variable. I always do that. We'll say label.font is equal to UI font.system font of size. And we're going to say 16, and then we're going to say the weight is medium because we want it to be a little bit more bold. And then what we're going to do is say label.text color is equal to .black. And then last of all, let's say label.translates auto resizing mask constraints is equal to false. Okay, now that's simply not return true, but label. That's simply to allow us to use NSLayoutConstraint for Programmatic Auto Layout. Okay, the last one we need is the info or the UI text view. So let's say file private var info text is UI text view, and it's going to be a function that calls itself. And this function is going to create a text view that simply returns itself so that info text is set to something. This info text, right? So next thing we need to do is just apply some properties to this. So let's say info text dot font is equal to UI font dot system font of size, and we'll say 12 with a weight of dot light, and then we're gonna just say info text dot text color is equal to dot black, and then we're gonna say info text dot is editable is equal to false. Now, the reason I have to set that is because if you don't do that, you can basically type inside of the text view because that's what it's for, but you just need to set that to false. And then let's say info text dot translates auto resizing masks into constraints is equal to false. And then I want to just put in some random text for now because we don't actually have this property inside of our model. So we'll just put in some random text and then add that in later in like an update video, okay? So we're gonna say this series will show you how to build a drop-down spots app. All right. Next thing we're gonna do is we are going to just compile our app and make sure this is all working. And it's not gonna show anything because while we have declared all these, we haven't really put them anywhere, right? We haven't added them to our subview. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna add them to our subview and then we're gonna write some constraints to kind of constrain them on the view. Now, before we do that, we need our cells to be a bit bigger because 80 pixels really isn't enough, or however many we set. We need it to be like 240 pixels. So let's go to table view controller. And what I want you to do, yeah, we didn't even declare it yet. What I want you to do is go to the bottom. Well, let's go to the middle here and let's say height for row at, which is part of the delegate. And then make sure you override it since we're using a controller. And we're just gonna return 240. And then let's recompile our application and you're gonna see that we have more space for each cell, okay? And then I'm gonna go back to cardcell.swift while that's compiling. Okay, so you can see we have our space now, but it doesn't look very good. Okay, we could set the background color to like gray or white or yellow or whatever you wanna do to kind of see it, but I think you get the point and that it's there, right? So let's go ahead and set that. And then what I'll do, and we'll get rid of that in a second. Now what we need to do is kind of constrain our image view, our title label, and our text view onto the screen. So let's create a function called setupConstraints, and we'll say file private function setupConstraints. And in here, we're just gonna add in our things, okay? Now think about the info text and title label. They could be in a text view, but we're not gonna do that just simply because the padding is weird on a UI text view. Like they could be in a stack view, but it's whatever. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say content view and just add them all to the subview. Add subview is feature image, content view dot add subview title label, and then content view dot add subview info text. So think about what we're doing here. We're calling our cell, it's hitting setup constraints, and then in setup constraints, after we have all of these declared, we're adding them onto our subview. So they're gonna exist inside of our cell. Now, since we're using NSLayoutConstraint, we don't have any frames. So we need to kind of constrain them with NSLayoutConstraint. So let's start with the left, the right, and the top of the image. We need to say feature image dot height anchor. Well, let's say top anchor dot constraint is equal to, and then we'll select this constructor that says returns a constraint that defines one item's attribute is equal to another. And we're gonna constrain it to the content view top anchor. So just think about what that means in plain English. We're simply saying, okay, we want the top of the image to basically touch the top of the cell. And then we want it to go down a bit though. So we'll provide this constant parameter and we'll say 8 pixels because we want it to go down 8 pixels. And then we have to activate it. So we'll say is active is true, the active state of the constraint. And now we'll activate our constraint. Now, this is great, but it won't really do anything because that's the only constraint we have. So there's no other constraints. So the image view isn't being pulled down or pulled to the left or right. So it's not going to be able to basically appear, right? So we need to paste it a few times and say left anchor, or let's say leading anchor. It's the same thing as left anchor, basically. And then we'll say trailing anchor and trailing anchor. Now let's go ahead and compile this. Well, first let's give it a height, right? Let's say feature image dot height anchor dot constraint is equal to like 140. And then we'll say dot is active is true. And remember the cell is 240 pixels high. So it's gonna be about a little over half the size, right? Quite a bit more than half the size. It's gonna be like it's gonna be like, I don't know, what's 140 divided by 240? It's going to be about 58%. Okay, so that's good, except for it didn't really, we're not really seeing anything, okay? So what I want to do is I just want to check the constraints or check the view by basically hitting this button down here, this kind of 3 iPhone view down here, which is basically going to allow us to see our view. And you'll see that we do have our image view, but for some reason it's not showing up. Now, the reason it's not showing up is because we haven't really applied the image. So let's go up here to the top of our file, and where we commented this out, that's kind of what we need to replace. We need to say feature image dot image is equal to cell data dot image. And that's gonna, well, cell data dot feature image. And that's gonna allow us to basically put our image that we were seeing before on our image view. And we don't need the optional because we know it's declared here. The default one is optional because it's not gonna create it unless we apply it. Okay, so we should see our images now on the screen, and you can see that it kind of has that 2-pixel border radius that looks really nice. Now you might be wondering, why is it pulled out to the right of the screen? The reason it's doing that is because where we're setting our trailing anchor, we're saying constant 8. And when it comes to the bottom and right of our screen with auto layout constraints, we need to use negative numbers and pull it inwards, okay? Now, don't ask me why it is the way it is, but it just is. It requires you to put negative values, okay? So we're gonna say it's equal to the trailing anchor plus 8 pixels, it'll put it right 8 pixels. But if we say it's the trailing anchor minus 8 pixels, it'll pull it in like that. Okay, so we're kind of set up there. Now, one thing I want to do before we add the rest of our constraints is get rid of this kind of selection on our cells. I don't like that it's giving us that selection. So what we need to do is we need to go into our table view controller.swift, and we need to go to our setup table view, and we need to just say table view dot, and then we'll say allows selection is equal to false. You might set that later, but we're not going to do it in these videos. Next thing I want to do is get rid of the lines. You'll see that there's that subtle kind of gray line. It's hard to see, but that line right there, we want to get rid of those. So we'll say table view dot separator style is equal to dot none. That will get rid of our lines. So let's go ahead and compile our application and see what we're looking at. Okay, so it's looking good. Okay, so that's great. Now, I don't want the gray color, but if we get rid of the gray color and turn it white and recompile it, let me just move this so you can see this screen better. Okay, now if we set it to white, it's gonna be fine and it might not look that bad, but we can easily kind of progress our app by providing some insets on our cells. Because you'll see that it's kind of inset like that, and we have that background color of that kind of gray on our table view controller. So let's go set that background color in table view controller.swift. By instead of saying white in table view controller.swift, we're gonna say something like UIColor.init, and we're gonna choose this constructor with red, green, blue, and alpha. And what we'll do is say 228 divided by 255, 230 divided by 255, and blue 234 divided by 255. The alpha will be 1, that's just the opacity. If we did 0.5, it'd be half visible. If we did 0, it would be invisible. 1 is just solid. Okay, now I kind of just got this color by looking on the internet. It's RGB. If you don't know much about RGB, just kind of do a Google search. It's not Swift programming, it's just kind of how colors work. Okay, so we're good there, except for we don't really even see this color. And that's because we don't have our inset anywhere. We see it behind our table view controller cells, but we don't really see it anywhere else. Okay, so let's inset our cells by going to our cardcell.swift, and we're gonna override a function that's gonna be called, or that is called, layout subviews. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to go to the bottom here, below our setup constraints, and say layout subviews. And we're gonna override that function, and we're gonna call super.layout subviews to call the normal layout subviews call that UITableview cell does. Now, that's not really necessary to understand the object-oriented concepts of this, so don't worry about what super is, but just know that we do it in our override, in our initializers, and we do it in our view.load and stuff like that, okay? What I want you to do in here is I want you to set the frame of content view. Now, the reason we're doing it in layout subviews is because the subviews have been laid out, and we can then modify the frame. So we'll say .frame is equal to content view .frame, and then we obviously don't want to just set it to the normal frame. That doesn't make any sense. So we'll say .inset, and then it's going to say adjust a rectangle by the given edge insets. by UI edge insets. And this is going to allow us to kind of inset our view. So we'll select this initializer, and for the top, we'll inset it 10 pixels, the left 30, the bottom 10, and the right 30. So it's going to inset our view about 20 pixels apart from each other and 30 from the sides. So let's see what this looks like. It's going to look really good. And you'll see that it looks kind of good, except for the background color is still there. You'll notice the image goes in, but the background isn't. So what we need to do is go up to where we're saying background color is white and leave that how it is. But we also need to set the background color of the actual cell to clear. Okay, because right now we have two kind of views. We have the cell itself, and then we have the content view that exists inside the cell. Now you might be wondering, okay, why don't we just use the normal cell to add all of our subviews? And the reason we don't do that is because if you type in content view, you can see that it says, okay, I guess it doesn't say it here, but if you command click into content view, it should have an explanation. It says, if you want to customize cells by simply adding additional views, you should add them to the content view so that they will be positioned appropriately as the cell transitions in and out of editing mode. So that's really the one we want to add, just because that's what Apple says. And I assume that they know best because this is their phone, right? Their platform. So that's how you kind of set up those. Before we end the video, let's go ahead and set the constraints for the title label and info text. This will be pretty quick, so let's just go ahead and get into it. Let's copy our feature image constraints, and we don't really want to use the same ones, right? We don't want to constrain it to the top of the content view. We kind of want to constrain it to the feature image, the bottom of the feature image. So what we'll do is we'll say equal to feature image dot bottom anchor. And then what we'll do is instead of trying to apply this to feature image again, we'll say title label, and we'll change that for all these. We'll leave the leading and trailing the same because it's clear we still want it to the left and right. And the hide anchor we can get rid of. And if we recompile our app, it should look pretty good. Now, the only ones we have left now are the info text constraints. And you might be wondering, this is getting kind of messy, and it really is. But we can write functions to basically clean this up, which I'll make a YouTube video on my channel, maxcodes. But we're not going to do that here, at least yet. Maybe I'll update it later and add that video in. Okay, so you can see that it's not there, right? But if you click on the debugger down here, the three little iPhones, you'll see, or we should have the text. Well, we don't because we're not really setting a height and we don't have any text in it. If we had the text in it, then it would look fine, but it would auto set a height. This is being slow right now. That's annoying. I accidentally hit the square instead of hitting play and then hitting the square. When you get out of that debugger, you want to hit play and then you want to hit the square to stop it. All right, anyway, it's fine. But basically what we need to do is set the text. So let's go to title label dot text is equal to cell data dot title. That's in the top of our card cell. Go ahead and recompile the application and get rid of these comments while you're at it, while it's compiling. And you're going to see now that we kind of have these set. We have this title set and it looks really clean. Okay, so let's get into one more thing we need, right? And that's our info text. So what I'm going to do is copy the feature image constraints again. And I'm going to get rid of the hide anchor. And I'm going to copy the top anchor and paste it down here so I have these. So go ahead and get that in there. And then we're going to change this to bottom anchor. And then we're going to change this to bottom anchor. And the constant's going to be -8. And then I want to change these obviously to info text. And then the top anchor needs to be different, right? It needs to actually be the title label dot bottom anchor. And then let's go ahead and save that and compile it. And you're going to see that it's all in there pretty nicely. Okay. Now, again, this is really kind of a lot of code just for a few views. And that's exactly why we would write some nice custom functions. That, again, will be on my YouTube channel. All right, on my channel. All right, so that looks good, except for our text kind of looks really like cut off, right? Let's go ahead and fix that by not insetting it so much. Let's make sure that the constant onto the bottom anchor is 0, or we can just get rid of it entirely because we kind of just want it to be able to touch the title. All right, and then we can leave the bottom anchor to -8. And let's recompile it. And if that error is still there, then we'll have to mess around with our bottom anchor, or that logic error, I guess, because it's not an error, but it doesn't look the way we want. Okay, so that looks good. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to kind of pull it to the left a bit, because you'll see it doesn't really line up with our title too much. And I think that's just a text view thing. So what we could do is actually pull the title over and then capitalize it, because you'll see in the completed app, I have it pulled over a little bit. I didn't pull the text over, and then I have the title capitalized. That's optional if you want to do that, but let's just go ahead and do it. So what I'm going to do on the title label is say, instead of the leading anchor 8, let's just set it to 10. And let's recompile that. And then let's go up to here and let's say that the title label.text is equal to cell data.title, and then we'll just say .uppercased. And that's going to capitalize it. Now you'll also see it's not really pulled over all the way we want it. So let's recompile it and let's go down here and let's say 12. And then I also want to kind of pull the info text a little bit higher up toward it, right? So what we'll do is we'll add that constant back in, except for this time we'll say -4, and we'll recompile that, and you're gonna see it looks a lot better, okay? Okay, so let's do that. Pause that and get this code in, and you'll see that it looks pretty clean. Now, I actually think that that text could be a little bit smaller. I don't really like it capitalized now that I think about it. And I also think that the title label could go over another pixel or two. So let's say 13 pixels or units or points or whatever the variable is here that we're modifying in constant. And then you'll see that looks a bit better. And then let's go up here and let's just say lowercase. Well, we'll just leave it as default, and then we'll change the size to 15, and then let's recompile. These are all just little details that you don't really have to get in, but if you're really picky about the design like I am, you can go ahead and do that, the design of the user interface, not the code. And that looks really good, except for you'll see that our text view is overlapping our title. So let's just set the background color of our info text to clear. Let's say info text .background color is equal to .clear. And this is just a guess. I don't even know if this is gonna work, but I kind of assume it will, because that's kind of what I'm seeing there, is that it was overlapping it with a background color of sorts. Okay, and that looks really good, and I'm really liking the way our application is turning out. So that's it for this video. It's kind of a long video, but we got a ton done, like a lot done. Just kind of compare this to the beginning of the video. We really got a lot done. And I'll see you all in the next video where we're gonna get into closing and opening these cells, all right? I'll see you all in just a moment.